Hi there. Now that we've done modeling our couch, it's time to add some material to it. So let's go to the material editor. And in here, let's call in a Falloff component. This component is mostly used for fabric, and we're going to be applying it to our couch so that you can see how it works. Let's bring in a Corona physical material and add this Falloff to its base color. Now let's go ahead and add it. So I'm going to select my whole couch, right click and assign material to selection. Now let's go ahead and add a background to this couch. We can delete this example. We no longer need it. And let's create a plane. Let's reduce all of its segments. Right click and convert it to an edit poly. So we're going to be creating the background just as we did for our chair. Let's go ahead and go into the edit edges and connect. Now let's just drag this edge over here. And again, let's create a back wall. And in order to reduce the shadows from our background, we're going to make this edge smoother. So inside edit edges, we can chamfer it. And just add an extra segment so that we smoothen this edge up. Like so, and now let's just hit OK. Okay, now that we have applied a Falloff to this couch, we're also going to be applying a Corona physical material without any textures on it to our background. So select your background, right click it and apply material to selection. Now we also need a light source. So let's go into the bulb icon and now Corona and Corona light. Make sure that we're working with the rectangle. So let's go inside our modifiers and change the shape from sphere to rectangle. Now let's place it as we placed it before using our rotation. Okay, let's move it closer. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and start the interactive render. Let's go to scene and start interactive. Okay, now let's go and see how this Falloff component works. And just before going into that, let's go into the performance. And inside performance, we already know that we have to uncheck this option. Let's go back to our slate material. Inside our Corona physical material, in which we have the Falloff component linked, let's just right click it and open the preview window. So because we have black and white colors working in this material, we can see that the closer that we are to the material, the darker it would be, and vice versa. So let's just change this color into a more reddish color. So let's make a contrast out of this. Let's just increase the value and the saturation like so. And now for our white color, we can actually use a blue tone. Now let's start the interactive render. And we have a better example by going into our pillows. So we can see how this Falloff color will add a little bit more of depth into our textures. And this is very useful when we're working with fabrics, because fabrics usually have a wavy material. If we're using pillows or scarves or a quilt, the Falloff component will bring the depth of this material to be a little bit more noticeable. We can also play with the parameters here as the Falloff type, like perpendicular and parallel. We can just tell it to be towards and away. So let's see how this one works. So you can see that we lose a little bit of depth if we change this from perpendicular to towards away. We can even try Fresnel, and you can try the other Falloff types. But the one that it's mostly used is the perpendicular and parallel. And as you can see, all of our materials will get a little bit more of depth into them. So what if we wanted this transition between these two mix of colors to be a bit more smooth? We can play with the mix curve graph. So in here, if we select this point, we can change it into a Bezier corner. So we would have this additional tool in which we can make this transition between these two mixes a bit more smoother. And we can actually bring that depth again to be a bit more noticeable. Now let's go ahead and right click and Bezier corner this. point over here so that we create this type of graph and make this a bit more noticeable. So you can see the contrast in between these two, but this might be a bit too hard. So let's go ahead and reduce this a little bit. And we can actually even bring an extra point if we wanted to have a better control of this transition. So if I go here to add point and just click once in the middle here, and I can right click it and turn it into a bezier corner too, I can have this additional point here, but it's not really necessary at this point. So let's delete this additional point that we just created. There we go. Now let's go back to this smooth transition that we had. So this is the idea behind Falloff. Let's go ahead and just add some materials to it. Now let's stop this interactive render and bring in a Corona bitmap. Okay, so I got these textures from textures.com. Let's bring all of them in. So the first one, it's the albedo, and let's just drag another Corona bitmap. Let's go for the alpha, which in this case we can use it as an ambient occlusion map. Now the height, which is, you already know, it's the displacement. The normal map. And finally the roughness map. So let's go ahead and create this material. We know we need the Corona mix for these two. So if I go and link this to the bottom and to the top, and now we know that we need to extract only the darker parts from this map. So inside the Corona mix, we need to tell it that the top texture is going to be multiply. Now the roughness goes into the roughness, obviously. Our albedo mixed with the ambient occlusion will go into the base color, and we know that we need a Corona normal for this normal map here. Let's plug it in. Inside the Corona normal, let's add gamma to input. And now we have the height map, which needs to go into the displacement. The normal map will go into the base bump. Okay, but we're missing the Falloff, obviously. So let's bring it in here, and we can just add the same material to map 1 and 2 because we're going to be adjusting the parameters here in our component. Now let's just replace this with the base color. Like so. Let's select our whole geometry without selecting the background, obviously. And I'm actually missing one of the supports for some reason. Okay, so we need to bring our couch a little bit up. So let's select the whole geometry again and bring this couch all the way up here. We obviously don't want to add this fabric material to our supports, so let's deselect them and also deselect the bottom box because I want to add a wooden material to it. Now right click and assign material to selection, and let's go ahead and add a UVW map for all of this couch. We are not going to be unwrapping all of this geometry because it would take a very long time, and it's not necessary. You'll see that only with the UVW map, we can actually solve most of our unwrapping issues. Let's go ahead and go for our mapping as a box. Let's try 250 by 250 by 250 for this one. Now let's go ahead and start the interactive render. And I've selected the background also, unfortunately. Let's bring a Corona physical material for our background and assign material to selection. There we go. Let's move in closer, and we can see that the mapping is not that good. So we need to actually make the mapping a bit smaller. So let's go ahead and try a 50. Okay, so this message is actually telling me that using the orthographic mode as an interactive render is not a good idea. It's going to take a toll on the memory of my PC. So I'm going to change it from orthographic to perspective. So let's keep on mapping this. So 50 by 50 by 50. Okay, it's looking much better now. Now let's stop the interactive render and actually let's play around with our tone mapping. So first of all, we already know that we need some contrast in here. So I'm going to add a 3 value in contrast. Let's also add a saturation negative 0.5. It's not really that necessary. Now in the simple exposure, we can add a bit more of light in here. And now I actually want to be careful with this highlight in this corner. So I'm going to bring in a highlight control for this. I'm going to go for a 1.3. It's going to be more than enough. Okay, so now let's add a little bit more of detail by adding another type of material for our supports. So let's go ahead into our material editor and bring in a Corona bitmap. And now let's go for a wooden texture. So I'll be just selecting this one that we've already been working with. And I'm actually just going to select the albedo in this time because it's not going to be really noticeable if we add some displacement or a bump map. So it's not really worth it. Now let's go to our Corona physical material. And place this texture into our base color. And we actually need to bring in a Corona color correct because this texture, it's a bit too dark. So let's just plug it in like so and add a 1.5 to its gamma. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our geometries. There we go. Let's just unselect everything like so and assign material to selection there. Don't forget that we also need to add a UVW map to this. So UVW map, I'm going to go for the box, which solves 90% of my UVW mapping problems. Let's go ahead and type in a 150 by 150 by 150. Okay, let's try our rendering again. And there we go. Looks pretty good. Now the next step that I want to do, it's again, add a bit more of detail to my fabric material. So for this, I'm going to use what we've already been seeing, which is the Corona layered material. So let's type in Corona layered material. And let's go all the way down here. We have our fabric textures, and let's just bring this a little bit up here and our fabric textures too. And now what I want to do is just to duplicate this material like so. And I'm also going to bring in a new map, which will help me mask this new material that I'll be working with. So I'm going to bring in a dirt map. So Corona bitmap, and let's look for that dirt map. I'm going to actually use the one that we saw for our chair. So our dirt texture, and open it. Okay, now for this second material that I'm working with, I'm actually going to make it a little bit more lighter. So let's go ahead and bring in a Corona color correct too. And let's just place it in between the Falloff and my base color. And let's go ahead and try a 1.5 in this case. Or actually, let's go all the way to 2 to make it a bit noticeable. I'm going to just bring this in closer. And this is going to be my base material, my grayish that we can see here. And I'm going to use this one for my layer 1, and my Corona bitmap will go into mask 1. Now I need to apply all of this material to my couch. Okay, back to our material editor, right click and assign material to selection. Let's go ahead and start the interactive render. Okay, so this is not going the way that we wanted to. So inside our Corona layered material, I'm actually going to reduce this effect that we're getting by going into layer 1, and we can reduce the second material that we're using to around 50%. The other thing that we can do is to add a Corona triplanar to this map. Like this, and I'm going to insert it in the X. Okay, so you can see that it's getting a little bit better. And we actually need to invert this map because I don't want these lighter colors to be all over the place. So I want to invert this. Let's go all the way down here to output and invert this effect, and there we go. It's getting a little bit better this way, but it's still a bit too strong. So inside our dirt map, we can actually go a little bit lower on our tiling. So 0.5 by 0.5 can help us fix this a bit more. And now let's go back to our corona layer material, and inside the masked material, we can tell it to reduce this by 40%. Or actually, let's go for a 30%. Okay, it's looking great. Now I want to add a bit more detail to the cushions. So let's close everything. I'm going to select these two geometries, and inside the polygon option, I can go ahead and select them, but with my spray option. So up here, let's hold our left click and select the spray option. And I'm going to actually select some of my polygons here so that I can add a noise modifier, and this will bring some detail in. Let's go ahead and select the object so we can select it with a bit more freedom. And I'm just going to randomly select these polygons right here. Let's not go all the way to the edge, as this will mess up our seam. And I'm also going to select it over here. Okay, just like so. Now on top of these polygons, I'm going to bring in a noise modifier. So let's go ahead and reduce the scale, and inside the strength, I'm going to play around with my Z value. Okay, let's just reduce the scale a bit more so that we can bring in some more wavy effects. Okay, let's try our interactive render now. So let's go inside our UVW map and render setup and start interactive. Okay, this is barely visible, so we can go ahead into our noise and just reduce our scale so that we can compact this effect a bit more. And you can see how it starts to give us a little bit more detail to our cushions, like so. And in the Z value, I can also go a little bit further into it. This is looking too much, so 1.3 should do the trick. Okay, so around 1.2 might do it. We can do the same thing with the support down here. So let's just stop this interactive render, and don't forget to end up in your UVW map in your cushions. So let's grab this geometry and give it a turbo smooth, just to give us a little bit more of polygons to play with. The number of iterations, we're going to go a little bit overboard with this just to make this example. So 5 iterations. Make sure that your seam is actually touching the actual couch. And for now, I'm going to right click and convert it to an edit poly. So I'm going to collapse everything so that I can select it with my spray option. So let's go inside our polygons. And we can just play around with this. Make it a little bit random so it looks a bit more natural. Make sure to press the Control key to keep selecting the polygons. Don't go too close to the edge because we don't want the geometry to break. This might be going a bit overboard. Let's try it with a noise anyway. Now we know that we need to reduce the scale a bit, and now play with the Z values like so. Let's reduce the scale a bit more. And let's actually go into the interactive render to see what we're actually doing. Okay, so we need loads more. Okay, you can see that we've actually breaking the geometry up here a little bit, not that much. So let's go ahead and increase the scale so that we turn this effect smoother. It doesn't matter that we're breaking it in the bottom part here, as it looks very natural. But obviously, if you want a brand new couch, you can reduce the effect of the noise by going into the Z axis, of course. We can turn it into a 1.4. Just a little bit of detail there. Okay everyone, so this is the conclusion of our couch. We've seen how easily we can do such geometries by using the Turbo Smooth with some physics from 3ds Max. I hope you enjoyed this section, and in the next one we're going to be preparing ourselves to develop our own very interiors. So I'll see you there. Bye for now.